From 2 misfiring pistols on the Capitol steps to 29 rifle rounds sprayed across the White House lawn to a bullet that grazed an ear in a Pennsylvania field. This is every attempt ever made on the life of a president of the United States, and the split-second detail that decided whether each one lived or died. Some survived because of pure dumb luck. Some survived because a total stranger in the crowd made a split-second choice that history never bothered to thank them enough for. And 4 of them didn't survive at all. There's a dual pistol misfire so statistically absurd that experts actually calculated the odds afterward. A president who kept giving his speech with a bullet already lodged in his chest, and one shooting that was stopped before a single shot was even fired. Buckle up, because the odds in this list are weirder than anything you'd find in a casino. We start in 1835, with the first attempt in American history, and honestly, the strangest. It's a cold, damp January day in 1835. Andrew Jackson, 67 years old and leaning on a cane, is leaving a congressman's funeral inside the Capitol when an unemployed house painter named Richard Lawrence steps out from behind a pillar, less than 10 feet away, and levels a pistol at his chest. The cap explodes with a loud crack. The bullet never fires. Most men in that position would freeze or run. Jackson did neither. He raised that cane over his head and charged straight at the man who just tried to kill him. Lawrence yanked out a second loaded pistol and fired again, this time at point-blank range. Also a dud. 2 guns, 2 misfires, one furious old president beating his own would-be assassin with a walking stick, while a Navy lieutenant and Congressman Davy Crockett wrestled the man to the floor. Investigators tested both pistols afterward out of sheer disbelief. They worked flawlessly. A firearms expert later calculated the odds of both misfiring back-to-back at 125,000 to 1. Jackson survived on pure statistical impossibility. Lawrence, it turned out, genuinely believed he was the rightful king of England and that Jackson was the only thing standing between him and his throne. A jury took less than 5 minutes to find him not guilty by reason of insanity. And somehow, that's simultaneously the most unbelievable story on this list and the tamest one. But luck runs out eventually, and 30 years later, it ran out for good. By 1865, the war Lincoln had spent 4 brutal years fighting was finally over. Robert E. Lee had surrendered days earlier, and the president let his guard down at exactly the wrong moment to celebrate. At Ford's Theater, watching a comedy with his wife, actor and Confederate sympathizer John Wilkes Booth slipped into the unguarded presidential box and shot him once in the back of the head at close range. Lincoln was carried across the Stret, never regained consciousness, and died the following morning surrounded by his cabinet. Booth leapt from the box to the stage, breaking his leg on landing, and allegedly shouted a Latin phrase meaning "thus always to tyrants" before fleeing on horseback into the night. He evaded capture for 12 days before being cornered in a Virginia barn and shot dead by Union soldiers. First sitting president ever assassinated in American history. Tragically, not the last. Now here's where the story turns genuinely eerie, because the next one almost feels scripted. 16 years after Lincoln, President James Garfield is shot twice in the back at a Washington, D.C. train station by Charles Guiteau, a delusional, failed lawyer who believed he was owed a diplomatic post for supposedly helping win Garfield the election. Here's the twist that makes this one so infuriating. The bullet itself probably wouldn't have killed him. It was the doctors. Over the following weeks, a rotating cast of physicians dug around inside his body with unwashed, unsterilized fingers and instruments, hunting blindly for the slug, and gave him a raging, spreading infection instead. Garfield wasted away for 11 agonizing weeks, losing over 100 pounds before finally dying, killed less by the gunman than by 19th century medicine's total ignorance of germ theory. Guiteau's own defense at trial was that he'd merely been the instrument and that God himself had done the actual killing. The jury wasn't moved. He was hanged the following year. 20 years later, it happens a third time, and this time it finally changes everything. William McKinley is working a public receiving line at the Pan American Exposition in Buffalo in 1901, shaking hand after hand, when anarchist Leon Czolgosz conceals a revolver beneath a folded handkerchief and shoots him twice at point-blank range. McKinley lingered for over a week, seeming at first to be recovering, before dying of gangrene from wounds doctors never fully located. The exact same story as Garfield, 20 years later, and still no reliable antiseptic surgery available for a sitting president. 3 presidents assassinated in 36 years was finally enough. Congress gave the Secret Service formal, permanent responsibility for guarding the president's life around the clock. It only took 3 funerals to get there. Speaking of the Secret Service's new job, they got tested almost immediately by the least presidential president to ever take a bullet. 11 years later, in 1912, Theodore Roosevelt isn't even president anymore. He's a former president running a third-party campaign for a 3rd term, stepping out of his Milwaukee hotel toward a waiting car when a saloon keeper named John Schrank presses a revolver to his chest from just a few feet away and fires. Schrank later told police that the ghost of William McKinley had appeared to him in a dream, pointed at Roosevelt, and ordered him to avenge his own death. The bullet tore through Roosevelt's folded overcoat, punched through a steel eyeglasses case, and plowed through a folded 50-page speech manuscript in his breast pocket before finally lodging in his chest muscle. Any normal human being goes straight to the hospital at that point. Roosevelt went straight to the podium instead. "I don't know whether you fully understand that I have just been shot," he told the stunned crowd, blood visibly soaking through his shirt, "but it takes more than that to kill a bull moose." He kept talking for nearly 90 minutes with a live bullet still sitting in his chest, only agreeing to see a doctor once he'd finished. Surgeons later decided it was safer to just leave the bullet where it was for the rest of his life. If there's a Mount Rushmore of presidential toughness, this is the founding legend. If Roosevelt's story is about incredible willpower, the next one is about the cruelest kind of bad luck, for someone who wasn't even the target. Fast forward to February 1933, and President-elect Franklin Roosevelt is giving an unplanned, informal speech from the back of an open touring car in Miami's Bayfront Park 17 days before his own inauguration, when a 5-foot-tall bricklayer named Giuseppe Zangara, a furious, unemployed immigrant nursing a lifelong stomach ailment he blamed entirely on capitalism, climbs onto a wobbly folding chair to get a clear shot and opens fire from about 25 feet away. A woman standing near him grabs his arm mid-shot, throwing his aim just enough. Every one of his 5 bullets misses Roosevelt completely, but one of them tears into Chicago's mayor Anton Cermak, standing right beside the car, and mortally wounds him. Cermak lingered for 3 weeks before dying, 2 days after FDR's inauguration. Zangara, when asked afterward whether he'd try it again given the chance, simply said yes, without hesitation. He was executed by electric chair just over a month after pulling the trigger, one of the fastest trips from crime scene to death chamber in American history. FDR himself walked away completely unscathed and went on to become the longest-serving president the country has ever had. Sometimes surviving history isn't about being the hero of the story, it's about literally being the one person the bullets happen to miss. Now, if you thought a shootout couldn't get more dramatic than an open car in Miami, wait until the gunfight breaks out at the president's own front door. 17 years later, in November 1950, 2 Puerto Rican nationalists named Oscar Caliaso and Griselio Torresola approached Blair House from opposite directions in broad daylight, planning to shoot their way past the guards and reach Truman's bedroom, hoping the assassination would ignite a revolution for Puerto Rican independence. Blair House was only Truman's temporary residence while the actual White House underwent major renovations, and at the exact moment the attack begins, Truman is 1 floor up, asleep, napping in his underwear on a warm afternoon, with absolutely no idea any of this is happening. Outside, a full-blown gun battle erupts on Pennsylvania Avenue in front of hundreds of pedestrians and shoppers. White House policeman Leslie Koffel takes 3 bullets to the chest and abdomen at close range and somehow still manages to drag himself upright, brace against his guard booth, and fire one final precise shot that kills Torresola instantly before Koffel himself finally collapses. He died of his wounds a few hours later, the only person ever killed defending a president who didn't even know the fight had happened until aides woke him with the news. Truman later commuted Colaso's death sentence to life in prison. He was eventually released decades afterward and returned home to Puerto Rico. A guard gave his life protecting a president who slept through the entire thing. Sit with that one for a second. 13 years of relative quiet followed. Then came the day that changed the entire country's relationship with its own optimism. In November 1963, John F. Kennedy is riding beside his wife in an open convertible motorcade through Dealey Plaza in Dallas, waving to crowds lining the street when shots ring out from a nearby building, the Texas School Book Depository. He struck fatally and pronounced dead at a nearby hospital within the hour, at just 46 years old. Lee Harvey Oswald was arrested within hours for the shooting and was himself shot dead 2 days later, live on national television, while being transferred between jails before he ever stood trial. A twist so strange, so improbable, that it fed decades of conspiracy theories that still haven't fully died down more than 60 years later. Kennedy remains the most recent U.S. president actually killed in office, and the trauma of an entire nation watching it unfold on live television reshaped American politics and American paranoia for a generation. After something that devastating, you'd think the country would get a long break. Instead, it got 2 attempts in the same month. In September of 1975, 2 women who had never met each other, moving in completely different circles, independently tried to kill Gerald Ford within 17 days of one another in the same state. First, on September 5th, Lynette "Squeaky" Fromm, a devoted follower of cult leader Charles Manson, dressed in a bright red robe, stepped out from a crowd in a Sacramento park and pointed a loaded .5 caliber pistol directly at Ford. A Secret Service agent's hand shot in and wedged itself between the hammer and the firing pin before she could pull the trigger. Then, just 17 days later, across the state in San Francisco, a very different kind of would-be assassin, a 45-year-old former FBI informant named Sarah Jane Moore, actually fired a shot at Ford from about 40 feet away. A bystander named Oliver Sipple, a former Marine who happened to be standing right beside her in the crowd, grabbed her arm at the last possible instant, sending the bullet wide into a nearby building instead of into the president. "I'm sorry I missed," Moore said, remarkably candidly in an interview years later. "I don't like to be a failure." Ford refused to stop meeting the public after either attempt, insisting that shutting himself off from ordinary people would mean something in the country had truly broken beyond repair. 2 completely unrelated plots, same city, same month, same president, and in both cases, one total stranger happened to be standing in exactly the right spot at exactly the right second. 6 years of calm passed before the next one, and this attempt is the one most people picture first when they think of this topic. In March 1981, barely 2 months into his first term, Ronald Reagan is walking out of a Washington hotel toward his waiting limousine when John Hinckley Jr., a troubled young man fixated on actress Jodie Foster and convinced the attack would somehow finally win her attention, fires 6 shots from the crowd in under 2 seconds flat. One bullet ricochets off the armored presidential limousine, flattens and lodges dangerously close to Reagan's heart, collapsing one of his lungs. He's bleeding internally so severely he nearly dies in the hospital hallway before doctors even locate the wound. And yet Reagan, 70 years old and freshly shot through the chest, reportedly kept cracking jokes the entire way there, telling his wife Nancy he forgot to duck, and telling the surgeons prepping him for emergency surgery that he hoped they were all Republicans. He recovered fully and went on to serve 2 complete terms. Hinckley was found not guilty by reason of insanity and spent over 3 decades in psychiatric custody before eventually being released. Reagan's brush with death was terrifyingly close range. The next attempt takes the opposite approach entirely. Pure firepower, no plan for getting close at all. In October 1994, a hotel upholsterer named Francisco Martin Duran, who'd already vanished from home for weeks and driven cross-country from Colorado, plants himself on the public sidewalk outside the White House fence wearing a bulky trench coat, pulls out a semi-automatic rifle, and unloads 29 rounds at a group of tourists standing on the north lawn, apparently convinced that one man's haircut in the crowd belonged to Bill Clinton. It didn't. Clinton was inside at that exact moment, relaxing and watching a football game, never remotely in danger. Bullets chipped the White House's thick sandstone walls and shattered a window near the press briefing room before three ordinary bystanders tackled Duran mid-reload and pinned him to the sidewalk until Secret Service agents arrived. As he was finally handcuffed, he reportedly told the agents, "I wish you had shot me." At trial, Duran's insanity defense centered on a bizarre story about aliens and a menacing mist connected by an umbilical cord that he believed he was destroying. The jury deliberated less than 5 hours and rejected it outright. 40 years in federal prison. For 30 years after that, no one got anywhere close. Then, in a single election year, it happened twice. On July 13, 2024, Donald Trump, a former president campaigning for a return to office, is mid-sentence at an outdoor rally in Butler, Pennsylvania, gesturing toward a chart about immigration numbers, when a 20-year-old named Thomas Matthew Crooks opens fire from an unsecured rooftop nearly 450 feet away, having climbed up with a rangefinder and a rifle that security had somehow failed to flag in time. The first bullet grazes the top of Trump's right ear. Secret Service agents swarm and pile on top of him almost instantly. Crooks is shot dead by a counter-sniper within seconds, but not before one rally attendee, a former volunteer fire chief who died shielding his family, is killed, and 2 others are critically wounded. And if one attempt in an election year sounds improbable, here's the twist. It happened again just 2 months later. In September 2024, a Secret Service agent scanning ahead of Trump's arrival at his own golf course in West Palm Beach, Florida, spots a rifle barrel poking through the tree line before a single shot is ever fired. The agent opens fire first. The suspect, Ryan Rout, flees without getting off a shot and is arrested shortly after on a nearby highway. No injuries, no headlines about a wound. Just a career federal agent's split-second glance toward the wrong bush at exactly the right moment, quite possibly the least dramatic-looking assassination attempt on this entire list, and maybe the most quietly terrifying, because the only reason it stayed that way is one person happened to be looking in the right direction. So here's where we land. 14 attempts across nearly 200 years on sitting presidents, former presidents, and presidents-elect alike. 4 of them actually died. Lincoln, Garfield, McKinley, and Kennedy, and every other name on this list walked away, some through genuine grit, most through an inch of distance, a misfire, or a total stranger's reflexes at exactly the right moment. Andrew Jackson survived on a 125,000 to 1 coincidence involving 2 duds in a row. 2 unconnected women went after Gerald Ford in the same 17-day window, in the same state, without ever knowing about each other. And 2 separate men went after the same candidate in the same election year, 111 years after a bricklayer in Miami accidentally killed the wrong man standing 1 foot from his actual target. And here's the detail that still doesn't sit entirely right with historians. Several presidents on this list reportedly had oddly specific premonitions about their own deaths in the days just before an attempt was made. Lincoln is said to have described a vivid dream about his own funeral to friends only days before he walked into Ford's theater. Whether that's genuine historical record or after-the-fact myth-making is something historians still argue about today. Make of it whatever you want. If you made it this far, drop a comment with which attempt on this list actually shocked you the most: the misfiring pistols, the sleeping president, or the bricklayer who killed the wrong man entirely. And follow the channel if you're into this kind of deep dive into the split-second moments that almost rewrote American history.